There's lots of people who are just there for the ride. They're there to have a bit of fun. There was someone I watched yesterday in Tamworth showing his backside to the police, being egged on by a group of his friends. That doesn't seem like a very political thing to me. There are people who are probably very drunk. They've been drinking all day. And lots of them, didn't look like, although it's hard to tell, like they were members of, card-carrying neo-Nazi groups that are banned by the police. There are probably people who have heard about it. They've heard about it through friends. They're going along. I mean, I don't want to trivialize it too much. I mean, you can hear horrible racist slurs just being kind of bandied about on these things sometimes. You can hear that stuff being shouted in a way that, I really hope the police have been recording all this stuff and can use it as evidence, because it shows that the motivation for a lot of this is racist rather than just about the specific issue of the migration hotels, which isn't necessarily motivated by racism.
Now, did you know that Keir Starmer has been Prime Minister for just a month? And already he has a crisis on his hands. What can he do about the riots? Let's speak now to Alicia Fitzgerald, who is Times Radio's political correspondent. Morning to you.
Morning.
Now, there's going to be a Cobra meeting this morning, and that is pretty much always a sign that the government knows it has a problem. Who's going to attend it? Is anyone being called back from holiday? What does this mean?
Well, Cobra meetings, as you say, are always a sign of an emergency. It stands for Cabinet Office Briefing Room A, which is a room on Whitehall effectively used for a reaction to an emergency. And partly this is obviously because in August, Parliament is no longer sitting. All of the MPs have gone back to their constituencies, so it's a lot harder to gather people and create an effective response. But also because of the scale of this issue, I think Keir Starmer has decided that this is the appropriate way to react. So normally this would see people like the Home Secretary, policing ministers, all of the senior cabinet officers, as well as other further members of the cabinet as well, alongside important people, so intelligence officers, police constables, anyone who would be deemed as vital in preparing an adequate reaction to what's happened over the past week or so.
And are they just making sure that there are enough resources in terms of police, hospitals, judges, prison places? Is that what they're doing?
So partly, yes, it's about touching base across all areas affected by these riots and making sure that everyone in all aspects of it are on the same page and are aware of the resources we have. But it's also about sharing information between all of those people. So something that a politician might bring, for example, Yvette Cooper, might be different to what a senior chief police constable would bring to that debate. So it's about sharing intelligence, it's about working together and deciding the best way to respond and react.
I'm looking at the figures. I think it's just over 400 arrests that have been made. Now, I don't know if that's a lot or not that many, but what kind of impact does that have on the system? Because they're also talking about, Yvette Cooper's talking about people being tackled online. So where do the resources come for dealing with all those people?
And I think this is the big worry in government and amongst the public at the moment, because we know that the police are already dwindling in numbers. They are under-resourced. There are not enough police officers across the UK for a normal day, let alone when such a huge crisis emerges. So that is definitely a concern. But Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper have said that what they want to do to try and mitigate the lack of resources generally is to react in a similar way to how the government did in 2011 when the London riots happened. And that includes making the courts stay open for 24 hours to try and get people through the system faster, and to stop potentially police officers from taking annual leave over the next few weeks in order to make sure that there are enough people on the ground to try and mitigate this.
And are those things currently happening? Are they going to happen?
So the courts, it seems like that's very much underway, and that does seem like it will happen. The police officers is a bit more difficult to do because they're obviously under so much stress at the moment. It's a difficult thing to kick into place.
Alicia, thank you very much. Alicia Fitzgerald, Times Radio's political correspondent.
How did misinformation about the Southport attacker spread so quickly online? And how did the protests get organised so effectively? Joey Durso is the Times senior data journalist, and he's been following the social media footprint in the past few days. Morning to Joey.
Morning. Hi.
How big a factor has social media been in all of this? Because it feels from the outside that it's played quite a significant role.
Yeah, certainly. I think what's new now that wasn't maybe the case in 2011 or another other protests further back is that you can just live stream this stuff. So if you go on TikTok and click on the live tab, there are just people streaming riots, streaming protests. And the funny thing about it is you can almost eavesdrop on them. It almost feels like you're sort of embedded with them, standing next to them. You can hear people chatting about the weather, about what they're doing at the weekend while they're, standing outside a Holiday Inn full of migrants. So it's really sort of quite eerie the way you can do that. Um, and no one seems to be that bothered about protecting their anonymity. You see people calling each other by their first name. You can often click on their accounts and see exactly who they are, which is quite bizarrely. I was just sort of sitting on my sofa last night, listening in on these people protesting in Tamworth, and I was doing the same earlier in the weekend in other places.
And what are they saying, Joe? Because that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting that they feel that they can't be punished, which may or may not turn out to be true, but that they obviously feel a certain amount of impunity in what they're saying. You can tell us what they're talking about. What's the motivation? What are the central messages coming out of the things they're saying?
It's immigration. It's the specific issue of these asylum hotels. But I think making it all into this sort of very coherent political debate is almost a mistake. There's lots of people who are just there for the ride. They're there to have a bit of fun. There was someone I watched yesterday in Tamworth showing his backside to the police, being egged on by a group of his friends. That doesn't seem like a very political thing to me. There are people who are probably very drunk. They've been drinking all day. And lots of them, didn't look like, although it's hard to tell, like they were members of, card-carrying neo-Nazi groups that are banned by the police. There are probably people who have heard about it. They've heard about it through friends. They're going along. I mean, I don't want to trivialize it too much. I mean, you can hear horrible racist slurs just being kind of bandied about on these things sometimes. You can hear that stuff being shouted in a way that, I really hope the police have been recording all this stuff and can use it as evidence, because it shows that the motivation for a lot of this is racist rather than just about the specific issue of the migration hotels, which isn't necessarily motivated by racism. Of course, you can't say that about every single individual, but there's some really horrible stuff that you can overhear on these streams.
And that's important, because you do get some people saying, well, hang on a second, there are some people there who are thugs, and there are some people there who are trying to make a legitimate protest about whatever, mass immigration. But the point is, if you're standing next to people who are trying to set fire to a hotel, or you're standing next to people who are using racist language, you're at a racist event. And if you're there, you're racist. And if you don't want to be racist, you've got to leave. I mean, is it as obvious as that? These things are very fired up, leery places where you shouldn't be there unless you subscribe to that.
Well, I think, when someone's burning a hotel with people in it, I can't see any justification for that. I think there are certainly some people earlier in the day, and particularly, people are appalled at Southport, and some of them are just saying things like, save our kids. I mean, who can disagree with that? But these things can kind of morph in character, particularly as the day goes on, particularly on a weekend day when people have probably been drinking. And certainly once night falls, these things have a really unsavory character. I mean, I wouldn't say that every single person who has been at these protests in the day is necessarily a racist, or that some people haven't had perfectly legitimate reasons to be there or political motivations. But these things have a really dark character often, and that certainly is, as I said, as things get later in the day. And I think, there's some really horrible elements here. There's some really horrible elements egging it on. And this is not something that I think the vast majority of people would want to be associated with.
Social media has changed in the last few years. Things like TikTok now exist, which didn't really exist in the past. Elon Musk has bought Twitter, and it's become a much more, how would I put this? It's been a much more open source of information. It tries not to make moral judgments. If it makes moral judgments, it's in favour of certain areas rather than against them. It strikes me very obviously when people are talking about going to these events, you look beneath it and it's a sea of blue ticks all egging each other on. Does that make a difference, do you think, the way it's been organised on social media? Not broadcast after the event, but actually organised beforehand?
Yeah, and I think, Twitter's really changed in how easy it is to just come across overtly racist content and big sort of, white nationalist people with massive followings. You just come across them without even trying to, which wasn't the case a year or two ago, and this stuff was actively moderated. I think a huge difference also with TikTok is the more mundane reason that phone signal has improved massively, right? Everyone's got 5G. It's quite easy to just live stream something from the street outside your house. That wasn't the case a few years ago. So the landscape is changing very quickly, and it's much easier to live stream a riot, to whip up a riot, than it maybe was not so long ago.
Yeah, that must be one of the differences between 2011 and 2024. Joey, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us. That's Joey D'Urso there, Times' senior data journalist. He's been watching in real time some of these riots taking place.